Welcome to a live taping of the Data Mesh channel, episode 3. Today I'm happy to have Zachary Friedman from Immuta joining me as we talk about data access. Now, data access is a challenge that all of you, I'm sure, are dealing with. It's a challenge that I have dealt with quite a bit in the past. I haven't met anyone that's really solved that, certainly not across an entire enterprise. But I'm excited to have a conversation about how we think the data mesh might be able to help us with those problems. What are the characteristics or elements that the data mesh framework may be able to help us with, not only just in the short term, but how can data mesh framework help us in a longer term as we build a strategy for data mesh? How can that help us with data access? So we're going to start today by talking about the problems, and then we'll get into talking about how the data mesh can help. You ready to get started? So am I. Welcome to the show, Zachary.
Adrian, nice to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. So data access, you're an expert. Glad to have you. I've been really thinking about this topic for some time, and I was trying to find the right person to have a conversation with and talk to you. You and I have had a couple of conversations. I said, that's the guy. And so not to set the bar too high there, Zachary, but the bar's been set pretty high.
Try and live up to it.
So here's the deal, right? Let me see if I can talk about what I've seen personally from a data access perspective, what I've seen with some customers, and then I'm going to sit back and see if you agree and see if you've seen some different points. But on my side, one of the challenges that I had with data access was something I felt like I could solve in isolated areas. I could solve access for a lake, create a model, there's some policy, there's an approach. Maybe if we're lucky, there's a process. Then if I just looked over to the side, there'd be a different lake, and then I would have a different access approach, different ownership, different process. Maybe it wasn't as formal as the last one. And then you looked over to the side and there was another lake. And again, I felt like the access process or the processes were different. And then I started thinking about where the data was stored, right? Was it an Amazon store? Was it a Google store? Was it an Azure store? Was it on premise? And those technologies, if you will, they guided me in some cases in a slightly different direction. So now the access tools that I was using were different as well. So now the processes were different, the backend tools were different. And then you get to the data itself. You've got data privacy, you've got integrity issues, you've got confidentiality issues, other set of things you had to account for. So I always felt like the solution itself was never the same. And if you were on the front end, a data consumer, just trying to get access to your data was really hard to do because there were so many different loopholes. Well, you got to do it this way here and that way somewhere else. And that was very, very frustrating from a data consumer perspective, very frustrating from a CDO perspective. And again, it was difficult to solve because of all the volume, the diversity in the different sources, and then the growing demand on the front end for more and more people that wanted data. So that was my challenge. I think that's a challenge a lot of people will recognize. What have you seen on your side, Zachary?
Yeah, absolutely. All of these challenges that you mentioned, we've seen and our customers see every day.
Yeah.
I think the first thing, access is hard. So what and why? First thing is right person having the right access. Just a lot of what you mentioned there. The implementation of that, right? Who implements it? Which will impact scalability, right?
Yeah.
So if you need a lot of our customers come to us, and they're like, we can't have engineers implement this. Like, we can't create a Jira ticket. We can't have a whole thing and have code written. What else can you offer us to increase scalability? And one way you increase scalability is by increasing the amount of people who can implement, giving the right person the right access to the right thing.
Is it taking too long to get that access? Just toss more engineers at it. Absolutely.
Right, exactly. There's something from Brooks literature with, if it takes one engineer 2 months, it takes 2 engineers 4 months. So some element of that for sure.
I will real quick. I had a business guy tell me once, why does it take 3 IT people to get me access to my data? Right? Why are they approving access to my data? And nothing against the IT team. I was on the IT team, but it feels that way sometimes on the front end when you have to go through people that don't really own your data, so to speak. Maybe they're more on the technology side. Their play in trying to do all the important necessary configuration on the back end but that work is often underappreciated because it doesn't help them until they get the access. Yeah, so
Absolutely.
real challenge. Fully agree.
Absolutely. The other thing you mentioned with, right person, right access, the heterogeneity, right? So
Yeah.
multi-cloud, hybrid, on-prem, cloud, multi-platform. This is standard in the enterprise.
Yeah.
And so, I think currently a lot of folks are faced with the option of doing a whole access control implementation using, ANSI SQL DCL and Teradata, using it in Snowflake, using it in BigQuery, rinse and repeat. So, even if it wasn't, even if the problem that we mentioned with having engineers do it in the first place didn't have the lack of scalability characteristics that it does, you'd have to do it 3 times, 4 times, and it's a real challenge.
No, I want to, because I don't know if many people appreciate that, because oftentimes when you're asking for something, in your mind, you're like, really, am I the first person asking for this? Like, it's a common data set, yet it's took me, X amount of months to get it last time. Yes, it's a different project. Yes, it's a different use case, but is it really going to take me another X amount of months to get it? And sometimes when I say X, it could be 18 months, right?
Yep.
It's a long time. Well, you've got to build a new interface to get that data. We have to bring that data forward. We got to get your access. Once you get your access, you got to get that access and it seems like, at least on the front end, I feel like we're having to redo the same project. That same access project gets redone over and over for the same people, for the same data. All that's changed is the use case in some cases, and that is a very real
use case. Maybe just the data platform, right? So if you think about core value proposition of BI, is that a BI user does not care if this comes from Teradata or Snowflake.
They shouldn't care. They shouldn't even know. Yeah.
Right. And so, it's almost a leaky abstraction in IT organizations and in companies. If the reason that I can't get this Tableau dashboard or this Looker dashboard, if somebody even has to explain that it's going to be 3 months because we haven't implemented access controls in Snowflake yet, why are we having this conversation?
Right. Well, I want to hear your third point, because I've got one that I think that has to do with that fine-grained access that makes this whole thing even harder. But let me let you cover your next point first.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the next thing that's difficult is data localization, right? So data localization in terms of access controls is specifically hard because the problems are new. These regulations are less than a decade old, a lot of them. And that just presents new challenges because we're solving new problems with paradigms that were invented to solve access in a world that didn't have the same type of strict data localization requirements that every Fortune 500 company, or really even smaller than that, faces today. Any multinational corporation.
Yeah, well, we designed a lot of this not very long ago, by the way, but like just yesterday, we designed that application-centric model, so to speak, for people to access data through an application or through a workflow. And that worked for us for a long time, but overnight, it seems you want to see if one night woke up the next Monday and all of a sudden it's access to data, which is an entirely different proposition. Absolutely. Because now you're having to create all kinds of specific rules for very specific kinds of data sets. And that kind of takes me to the bigger challenge that I think is when you start talking about fine-grained access. It's like, okay, great, I can get you access to that environment. But unfortunately, there's some data on there that has a data privacy flag. So we have to be really careful about which data sets you're going to get access to. And oftentimes the consumer is like, well, I don't know, right? I haven't seen the data. I haven't really had an opportunity to discover all the data. I kind of need to see it all to figure out what I really need. And there's a delay there, right? And then at the end, you start to create specific rules for maybe a person or a team to kind of pinpoint access to a table or to a row or to a column or to a field. And that takes a long time. But then you think about how you're going to do that for all of these data consumers and how that's really starts to work when it's like, well, that person needs access to these surgically carved out pieces, and that person needs access to these surgically carved out pieces. And then somebody says, well, just give them access to everything. And then our auditors get upset and our risk guys and legal guys get upset. And you can't do that in every case. You want to do that wherever you can, by the way. But where you can't, you need some fine-grained access. And you're back to that first challenge you talked about, right? More work for the engineers. Right. And it seems like there's, with the demand growing so fast, for a while there, it felt like, man, I don't know how we're going to solve this. For a lot of people, the idea was, let's get it all in one place, and then maybe that's going to be the solution. But even if you get it on one place, the fine-grained access piece I just talked about, it's still a problem. You can't get past it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you kind of led into one of Immuta's large value propositions, which, I think it's no secret to anybody who follows, the content we put out or is familiar with our product. There's basically two main ways of handling access controls. There's role-based access controls, which is to assign to assign access based off of, what group somebody is part of. We actually just posted I think obviously very good blog post, kind of
no bias.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Just analogizing, role-based access controls to like email distribution lists, which frankly, like everybody knows what an email distribution list is. And everybody thinks that their email distro lists are amazing and are all consistently named and stuff. There's no problems there. But then there's, you talk about fine-grained access controls, and a lot of the use cases that we see in the market are things based off of, somebody can have access to this data if they take this training course. Well, like, where do you bring this, user did take training course attribute in? I used the word right there, is attribute. I think to have the most flexible fine-grained access controls and the most scalable implementation, you probably, for any non-trivial use case, and I define non-trivial as like, beyond like finance sees this and marketing sees that, any sort of non-trivial use case, you're going to need a store of user attributes to base access controls on to be able to not only pinpoint, what cell to treat in a certain way to grant access or mask, but under what conditions and to whom, right? So, you guys have the concept of principle in the Trino open source project. It's basically a access controls based off of the humans, the attributes of a human person, as opposed to what department they're in.
Well, and perfect time to start thinking about how a data mesh might help, and just to talk about where, or balance out where we've been. So the conversation we've had so far is that there's an appreciation that trying to get a lot of people, growing demand, fast access to data across a very diverse set of sources, if you will, cloud, on-premise, multi-cloud, and warehouses, lakes, all of it is impossible. I had a use case that I studied. I can't remember who it was, but was it a year ago or so? I was reading about a bank that was projecting how many RBAC roles that we're going to need. And they were looking at like 3 million. And that was for one environment, 3 million RBAC roles, so that they could kind of make sure they were giving fine-grained access to a particular data set or a set of data sources, because they were carving up tables and rows for a lot of different people. And then they realized that's not auditable, right? You can't manage that. And what if a law changes or some data sovereignty rule changes? How do you apply that across that many? It doesn't work. It's not sustainable. And that's where I think data mesh can help, right? And so I started thinking about let's talk about domains first. In a data mesh, when we talk about data sources, we're allowing a domain owner, a domain access to data sources, right? So these data sources are accessed by this domain. That already simplifies things. Now you've got a domain team who's responsible for access to a set of data sources. Not all the people in the organization, just that one domain team needs to have the access rights. And we can decide what kind of access you want to give that domain team. You want to carve some stuff out, keep it at the source, no problem. You want to open up the full source, no problem. You will decide what makes sense for each of those data sources, but you make that data available to that domain. I think it's winning point number one. Winning point number two, then, those domains then maintain a set of data products. And that's, I think, where the real magic starts to play in, right? So now I'm looking at data products. And so what access are you giving to the consumer? Well, most of my consumers, I'm going to give access to a data product. And I can describe an aggregated data product pretty well. Here's where it came from. Here's what's in it. Here's how I put it together. Maybe here's how other people are using it. Here's the lineage, if you will. And so there's a lot you can learn about a data product very quickly to allow that consumer to use it, but you're only giving them access to that product. You didn't have to give them access to everything in the source. You didn't even have to give them access to everything in the domain. You gave them access to that product. And they probably have access to multiple products. But again, that's a win. If I'm building an access strategy, and when I used to build access strategies, if I had focused on products, I would have been much better off than trying to focus on trying to figure out how they're going to access everything at the source. It's another key one.
Super helpful abstraction. Absolutely.
So what do you think? Am I onto something here, Zachary? Can data mesh help us?
Yeah, well, so first of all, it's no secret that I'm a big fan of what you guys are doing. Yeah, that's point number one. Maybe let's take a step back and think about, like, for folks listening who are thinking about implementing a data mesh, like, what gets harder and what gets easier, right? So I think in terms of what gets harder, like, I think if you read any of the data mesh literature, it mentions that data mesh is both a technology strategy and it's a organizational design strategy, right? The first point you mentioned, the word that kept going on in my head was decentralization, right? You get a lot of benefits by decentralizing ownership and domains is a very helpful abstraction for this. But yeah, non-technical stuff, I think it probably gets harder at first, right? It's a go slow to go fast play. At first, decentralization might slow you down. So you need to think of it as an investment. Having said that, the payoff of that investment is things like faster speed to develop new data products. So that's that self-serve infrastructure pillar, if you will, of data mesh. And the other thing, you mentioned data as product, or data products, which again, by the way, I think the Starburst data product feature that just got released is phenomenal, obviously. But data as a product means that customers, so internal customers of your data, their experience with data is improved, often significantly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, it's just treating data as a product means that data quality, right? So we build software products think of an app development paradigm. We build software products and we test them, and we can make like automated and falsifiable statements that run in CI/CD jobs. And if something breaks, it fails. And that's how we build software products. We're moving towards being able to build data products this way.
Well, let's dig a bit deeper on data product side. And I love the challenge. Like I got to comment on something you said. And challenge is good, and we can, maybe it's an argument for episode 4. Yeah. But I've not seen decentralization slow anybody down. The reason for that is it's already there. You keep it the same. You connect to it where it is, no changes. You're up and running. My experience, I manage these big centralization programs that take years, and it's like, and are hugely disruptive. But anyway, that's up for another show. On the data product piece, though, I think as we're talking about what changes, I like the way you phrase it, like what really changes. Perfect, right? That's what people want to know. If you start thinking about a data product, would you still have role-based access for data products? Sure. Well, of course, you could apply role-based access to data products. And those roles would be simpler because you could categorize data products in a certain way that makes sense. Much more sense, if you will, than you were trying to categorize a bunch of sources and tables and rows and fields. Could you apply some type of down the road attribute-based policy or policy-based engine to a data product? Absolutely, even better. I know that's something we're all trying to get to. I know it's something Immuta is trying to drive. But are we aligned that we would create roles, at least for today, we would create roles to access specific data products? Is that how you would do it in Immuta?
So and this is probably Zach talking more
Love
than
it. That's what we're about. People are listening to you, Zach. They dialed in for you.
yeah. So I think that roles versus attributes, it's not an either or. I think it's important to have both. And so I guess, yeah, I mean, the answer to your question would probably be, both.
Both would work.
Immuta is, as we think of how to improve upon the workflows that we've built out for data products today, I see an end state that is involving probably both roles and attributes. I think the high bit of that point is that oftentimes, people using they could be using our product, or they could be, using a different product. They could be building their own product. I think that the end user, and probably the person, we'll call him the data governor maybe, but the setter of the policies, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
In an ideal world, they don't have to, that's an implementation detail. They do not have to care if it's, role or attribute based. It's just, it lets them accomplish their task. And so if it's that somebody wants to assign something to the finance team, they should just be thinking of it as, I'm assigning it to the finance team, not, does this create a Trino group, or does it, do something under the hood to key off of an attribute on a user. And, similarly, if people want to grant access to a set of data products because somebody's taken a training course, or because something that is, something you would only set on a user, they should be thinking of it in those terms. Like, set access policies put on your business mental model, as opposed to, your ANSI SQL DCL mental model, if you will.
Right. Well, and now we're starting to get into a conversation about what Immuta does and how we work together. And I think that's a really nice segue for us to kind of go in that direction. When we think about where we are now in the conversation, so we've talked about the challenges that I think most of us would agree to. Now we're starting to talk about how data mesh can help, specifically about the idea of, if you start to manage access from a domain perspective, that simplifies things. And you start to manage consumer access to data products, another simplification. We start thinking about also what that means in the back end, right? And what I mean by the back end is, this is an ecosystem, a data mesh ecosystem. You're going to have, hopefully, Starburst connecting a bunch of sources very quickly for you, where you decided it doesn't make sense to centralize, keep those where they are. And you're going to have maybe a Snowflake or maybe a Databricks where you've decided that it makes sense to put those in those places. And you want that optionality. You want to make that decision. What you don't want is the access pain of trying to figure out how you're going to connect the access to all of those, right? And what you do want, and that's where I think we work really well together from a connectivity perspective, is we can connect it all, and then you can make sure that the access mechanisms aren't so complicated, that they don't need to be. And it's not, and I'm going to take it even further here, because I think this is maybe a bit of a vision, but a hope as well, that I think people are going to look for, is it's not just making it easier for the IT administrator, but what happens a step further when we start to tell some of the business leaders to say, here are the keys. You can manage access to your data products. You can use policies, simple policies or simple roles to kind of do that with. That's when I think the idea of a self-service infrastructure, self-service data environment really starts to take hold. So anyway, there's Adrian's dream. Again, you said, Zach, this might be Zach talking, this might be Adrian talking, but I think those opportunities are real.
Absolutely. I think we share the same dream for the future. And I think, probably the most important point to highlight about, our two products are, Immuta is a single point of access controls. It establishes a policy enforcement point, if you will. Starburst, Trino, it's a federated query engine, i.e. it's one query engine, don't move data. I don't want to use this phrase, but it's the only one that comes to mind, a single pane of querying glass, if you will.
I like
a single query engine. And I think matching up a place to do access controls on a single query engine is use another cliche. It's a match made in heaven, if you ask me.
Perfect. All you gotta do is buy me dinner. And then we're good to go.
Anytime you're in New York. Yeah.
I used to live in Hoboken. Episode 5, we'll talk about Hoboken.
Very nice.
Awesome. So if we take that ecosystem piece just a bit further, so now we've got, again, we're imagining, right, the opportunities. We see the simplicity in focusing on domains and products, the idea of being able to go through one access model, if you will, that you can manage access in Immuta for, there was this, excuse me, I've seen a screenshot from Immuta, had a bunch of different sources listed there. Well, that's awesome, right? I can click on any one of them and I can manage access. And of course, I'm live and I want to cough, but I'm going to fight it. Because I'm a fighter.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that access portal, which is fantastic. Then on the front end, then I'm thinking, okay, so now I've got my access figured out. I've got my connectivity figured out. I've decided to keep these parts to decentralized. I decided these parts maybe make sense to centralize. Now I've got the other tools. It's an ecosystem. Now I've got a Calibra or an Informatica, or there's a number of tools that we work with very well. Mm-hmm. How does that play out across a bigger ecosystem? And are those some of those bigger data management tools? Are you also working with them?
Absolutely. So we work with Calibra, Alation. We can pull in, if you will, metadata about what tables are where. You use a data discovery tool, and we pull that in and we populate that into our I guess we'll call it a policy catalog, if you will. I think that the important point to highlight here, and this is just, you said ecosystem, this is for everybody. Extensibility is, and for the foreseeable future, will be paramount. And so, we have, we invest a lot in APIs that we expose so that people can integrate with our software. We leverage the same APIs that we expose to customers in order to build, specific non-data platform integration. So that would be your Calibra and Alation catalog integrations. If you're talking about our product, we leverage those same APIs that we give to users in order to ourselves build, some of those, I guess, bigger bet or deeper integrations that we offer to our customers as, like specific features, if you will.
Yeah. Now, well, it's and what you're talking about and what I'm hearing when you talk about features is once you get that foundation set up, we're just getting started, right? There's a lot more coming, a lot more that you can build upon that. You talk about access from the tool. They can leverage the model. Somebody says, yeah, but I've got Ping and I've got Azure AD and I've got regular AD and I've got all kinds of stuff. You're like, yeah, it fits in. And hopefully I'm not overselling you guys, but you guys work with all those players, right? Yeah, but on the back end, I've got Databricks and Snowflake and stuff. It's okay, it works, right? So, and I don't, you never want to oversimplify or something oversell. There's a lot of work that has to be done on the back end to figure out that the hardest part here to me is getting people to just rethink their access approach and understanding that there's security built in, that you don't have to lock everything down. When you start working about products, the idea is to open up access. It's a journey, it takes time to get there. People have to start thinking about opening up access. But in the interim, once you start to kind of create that democratization, so to speak, and kind of get people to open up, you've got the tools in place to manage it securely. And so if you're an auditor coming in and saying, all right, let me see what you got, I can show you end to end. I can show you an audit trail from end to end. I can't do that today. Right. I want to see where this data went. Well, it went all over the place. I don't know. I want to see where the data went. Sure, we connected it. This is the connection on the front end. This is how it's used on the back end and the front end, right? This is where they access the product. This is where we access the source, and that's really, really useful. Not just for the data consumer that wants it fast, but I would argue even more useful for the organization trying to demonstrate good security control. So
absolutely,
a lot of wins across the board.
Absolutely, and if you talk to our customers, one thing that I'm obviously no longer surprised to hear this, but was initially, you hear chief data officers talking about, the regulations are super important. Yeah. And like GDPR, we do a lot of annual turnover and we do not want to have to pay 4% of that in a fine. Absolutely. It is paramount to have those incidents not happen. Yeah. More important than all of that is the potential effect to the brand.
Oh,
and it was initially surprising to me, although it probably should not have been, to hear chief data officers, deeply technical individuals, talking about how at the end of the day, the number one thing is the brand.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I mean, that's point one. I guess point two, you mentioned all of the things. I think you, as a former chief data officer yourself, you were kind of going through the mental calculus. We got to hear out loud all the concerns that people are thinking when moving from on-prem to cloud, despite all the benefits of the cloud. And what happens when you think of all those problems and you don't have a solution? Data doesn't get moved into the cloud. You don't experience the benefit of the cloud. It could even be data still on-prem if there's not access controls on that. It might cause you to not put data into your data warehouse or data lake. And the impact of that is really that less about your business. What gets measured gets managed, and what doesn't get measured doesn't get managed.
Yeah. When speed isn't available, we went to Vegas this weekend. A buddy of mine wanted to race a GT2. I think it's a Ferrari. Wasn't available. He got stuck racing the Porsche Boxster. Very downgrade, right? So when you can't go fast, you'll take whatever's available. We're talking about the GT2. I think we want to go fast everywhere we can.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm going to close up because I think we'll keep going, and maybe there's room for another show for us to talk a bit more. But Zachary, first, before I kind of close up, thank you very much for joining me in this conversation. It's always good to get different viewpoints, especially from someone who deals with these exact challenges across a number of different customers. I'm excited about the partnership. I'm glad we work well together. I'm more excited about the benefits that it offers our customers, our collective customers. And so I hope you in the audience finds the conversation really useful. But let me cover some closing points. Great. So first, we talked a bit about kind of the perfect storm. I call it the perfect data access storm. We have an issue because we have data across a number of different sources. We have demand growing on the front end. More and more business teams and more data analytics teams are really driving that demand for more data. And in the middle, we don't have the right process or the right tools, if you will, to kind of create that data pipeline, right? So it's a perfect storm for issues. We wanted to talk today about the data mesh. And doesn't data mesh, I never want to be the guy that says it solves everything. No, it doesn't, right? There's still work to do. But I think if you think about the way that you drive access from a domain, so the domain has access to sources, and then you think about the way you enable access to products, reusable products, you're not creating access to tables and fields and rows and whatever, you're creating access to data products people are reusing, huge advantage. And when you start to use that tool to help enable democratization, when you start to open up access, that's even more powerful. That's what we're all trying to get to, so to speak, is enabling that data consumer, that business user to get what they want. If you bring it all together with Starburst and Immuta, we're able to use Starburst to connect across a number of different data sources. And then you're able to use Immuta to kind of give you that, and I'm not going to quote you exactly the way you said it, so I won't try, but allow you kind of that single portal, a single pane of glass, if you will, for access. So you can come into Immuta and manage access across the back end. You make it really, really easy for that data consumer to get the data they want right away and make sure that it's done securely so that your auditors and risk teams are happy. Fantastic conversation. Super grateful for Zachary for the time. I hope you enjoyed it. Please join us for episode 4 coming up soon.